Hi, and welcome back. And hopefully you can hear me better. Because at the request of many, I ended up ordering a little microphone that I could probably just attach, but I am a little bit concerned that maybe that's too far away. So we will trial it and hopefully we will have a better outcome where my audio is now out of sync with any videos that I input. Today's video is going to be about the many ways in which the late diagnosed autistic community, but actually just the autistic community in general, is gaslit. And I want to do a little game with this video, which is let's play bingo. Let's play bingo with how many you can tick off and say that you have experienced and whether you can shout bingo at the end. And because I'm fairly confident that most people who are autistic who are watching this will probably be able to relate to each point to varying degrees, but I imagine that you have experienced it at least once each point. And as always, please do comment if you have had any other experiences of being gaslit that I have not included in this video. So, if you're new here, welcome. And if you aren't new here, welcome back. I am Jade. I am a private therapist and I own JMS Wellbeing, which is this beautiful healing space. And I make content on mental health, thought-provoking material, and just a lot of videos on autism. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, please do stick around. We would love to have you here. And what I should probably mention before I get started is gaslighting. I know it's used very frequently, and I'm not somebody who uses words just because they're a buzzword and they're common and they're popular. I only use them when I have an intense amount of research to back it up, an intense amount of knowledge. Obviously, I am a therapist, so I do obviously understand it to its full degree. I'm not saying it as a buzzword. I'm saying it legitimately. Autistic people are gaslit frequently. And this actually often also results in them beginning to gaslight themselves.
We have been demoralized into not trusting ourselves as autistic people. Sometimes we feel like we can't even trust our own senses. This comes down to one fundamentally important property, and that's that we begin to gaslight ourselves even when we are being gaslit by another person. It's like a hall of mirrors where we take in a sense, but then we can't trust it. So the sense gets thrown out the window. A lot of the times when we're perceiving things, it actually is true, rather than something we should be so skeptical of that we fall into this pit of relativism where we can't trust any instincts at all.
So what this can look like is that because the person who is unable to meet the need of the autistic person doesn't want to address that it's something that they are struggling with, and that is then it becomes a them problem. Instead, they will point the finger and say it's your problem. You have something wrong with you. There is something that you are just not trying hard enough with. There is something that you are just over exaggerating, yada, yada, yada. And what then ends up happening is, because of the fundamental human need that we all have, which is to be accepted, to be loved, to fit in, to be met, to be able to effectively have attachment, we start to then begin to abandon ourselves. There is two things that can happen. Either you will have a great example of somebody who is able to show a strong sense of self and encourage a strong sense of self in you, or alternatively, if that is not happening, a common thing that I see is that they will begin to turn on themselves and they will begin to gaslight themselves. So although this list is about how you might be gaslit, it is not completely exhaustive for the things that might be going on in terms of the internal framework that you might also be suffering, where you're gaslighting yourself. Like, why can't I just do that thing? Why am I so much more sensitive than everybody else? Is it just something that I just need to learn to stop doing? There is many, many different ways in which this presents itself. But I'm going to jump into the list of ways in which you might be gaslit by other people. So the first one would be, and very commonly experienced, is the dismissal of your sensory differences and your sensory experiences. So that might be, I know, and this is true actually for me and my family members, we have an undersensitivity to pain. And the touch that we require is actually high pressure touch. Soft touch is unbearable. High pressure touch is almost a requirement to feel regulated. And we have an undersensitivity to pain. And sometimes that experience might be seen as, oh, you're just attention seeking, pretending that doesn't hurt you. And that is just not the case. Or alternatively, on the other side of the pendulum swing, your sensitivities, so say, for example, you may have an extreme sensitivity, which increases your empathy to emotions. You might pick up on emotions, or you just might feel emotions deeply. Or you might, say that actually just being outside is unbearable right now because it's super bright, because it's sunny at the moment. And people would minimize it or just completely dismiss it altogether because it is not the sensory experience that they're having. And this happens so frequently that actually the autistic person then begins to believe that it is a them problem and that there's just something fundamentally flawed with them, which is just not the case. Even in the diagnosis criteria, the wording suggests that there is something flawed about having sensory differences. Like their interpretation of sensory information is fundamentally wrong. So you can see just how many times this might crop up. And number 2 would be that they would have a frequent invalidation of their social perception. So an example is that and I'm going to use an example of mine. So for me, I like clear cut, crystal clear, not up for interpretation language. But I know that this is often misconstrued or misinterpreted or misunderstood as me being a bit cutthroat, me being a bit rude, me being a bit brutal. And again, I am being invalidated for my social interpretation, but also my social preferences, because I need it that way. I need it that way because when you add fluff, it can cause me personally confusion. But it could also be that if an autistic person is really struggling to connect with somebody socially, for example, for whatever reason that might be for them, it might be invalidated. It might be like, there's something wrong with you. Why can't you just socialize? Why can't you just go to that gathering? Everybody enjoys that. But actually, you don't enjoy that. So that is completely invalid. And again, I'm going to input a video here of a woman talking about how gaslighting of parents. And although it's not exclusive to parents, this can happen, like I say, it can happen in assessment in terms of not the assessor, because I can only speak from my experience and my assessor was brilliant. She was very knowledgeable, but it could be the assessor, but it could also just be the criteria. It could also be your school experience. It can be your parental experience. It can be your friend or social experience. It can be your work experience. And can you just imagine how many layers of this you're experiencing? But here is a video of that.
Parental gaslighting techniques and how they can be very harmful to an undiagnosed autistic child. The first one is ignoring your child's needs because you know what's best for your child. This not only gaslights your child into making them believe that if they have a need, then it shouldn't be met, but it also makes that child gaslight themselves into questioning the legitimacy of that feeling or if it really was important at all. The second one is when a parent will twist the facts for personal benefit. This would leave a child confused and questioning their own perception of reality, but particularly for an autistic child, they already don't know what the proper reality is. And they are looking to their parents to determine that better. Because when you're autistic and you're growing up in a world that is completely alien to you, you have to learn every single rule about this world. And a parent that just decides to twist and flip the rules whenever it seeks to benefit them is extremely confusing and harmful.
She also goes into the kind of manipulation of social styles and using information against people, which I will be going into in a minute. The denial of their own behaviors because of a bias that we all have. Again, I've done a video on that. And because of an almost superior complex. And what I mean by that, it's not like I'm saying that everybody goes around with that, like the superior complex that they're carrying. But what I mean is, if your experience is universal, it's quite easy for you to just assume that everybody's experience is the same way, and you be completely unwilling to change your view on that, even though we know everybody is not the same and not everybody is having the same experience, which affects, one, their internal world, but it also affects their version of reality. But anyway, I think this one is key because it suggests that they're not capable of being wrong because you're autistic. That, just the essence of that is so messed up, that they can't do anything wrong because they don't have any difficulties with social communication in their mind. They can't do anything wrong because they don't have any difficulties with their emotions in their own mind. But we all know that not to be true. Every human can have those difficulties. And every human has the right to also stand in their own sense of self and say that actually that is how I feel. But again, that is a form of gaslighting that can happen to the autistic community. The fourth one would be having the ability to use manipulation due to their communication style. So what I mean by that is, we know for the most part, the autistic person, or I'm saying again from my frame of reference, I need a lot of information. All right. The thing that I always did to kind of go under the radar is I would begin to ask a lot of questions. If I ask questions about that person and their perception, they was often very willing. They was often very willing to give me that information without me being detected as just not understanding the situation. But basically what I mean is that for the most part, we need a lot of information to be able to feel like we can make a confident answer or a confident response. And there is so many nuance, there's so many variables. And for the most part, the generalized sort of neurotypical response would be that they would just know what is expected. They can use vague language. They can make assumptions and come to the same conclusion. They cannot have to clarify themselves. They don't even necessarily always have to understand their whys, and that is widely accepted. But they might use that as a deliberate tactic, not always, but as a deliberate tactic to keep that person out of them being able to be included in the social interaction. So that could look like just using really vague language, knowing that that autistic person is going to be confused because they've seen it enough times and they know that that person might need clarity, or they might need it to be really crystal clear, but they might deliberately do it so that they can feel at an advantage and the other person can feel at a disadvantage. And that does happen. In fact, I see this happen a lot in workplaces and schools. And again, disclaimer, I'm not saying everybody uses it that way, but there are many people who are highly intelligent who know that they could do better, but they choose not to because they like to feel at an advantage. And number 5 would be pathologizing normal reactions. An example of this could be if an autistic person in that situation I just said there before is then beginning to feel excluded, they begin then to maybe isolate, distance themselves, and feel really rubbish inside. It would be the idea that that response is invalid or that there is something fundamentally wrong with you for having a very normal reaction. It is normal for you to feel like I need to protect myself. I'm feeling some level of threat at not being included. And when I've tried to communicate that, I'm still not being heard. I'm still not being listened to. And then I'm having some sort of shutdown or meltdown response to that. And that actually these things are normal reactions for my profile and for how I'm receiving the information and for how I'm being treated. But what can happen is that actually because they don't deal with things like that, because they don't experience that, they feel like actually that normal reaction is not normal and they pathologize it. Number 6 would be undermining a person's ability to self-advocate. This could look like saying that you're difficult for asking for accommodations or completely invalidating your interpretation of all that you've experienced because you know yourself better than anybody. And then basically saying that is not true. I don't know why you're asking for that. I don't know why you think that you have that. I don't know why you're saying your experience is like that, because it's not. And they will just completely undermine your ability to self-advocate. That is gaslighting. And number 7 would be using autism as a weapon, blaming things like conflict or disagreement on the fact that you're autistic, saying that actually anything where, again, I know I touched on this with another point, which was the opposite side of it, which is that they can't be wrong. But when anything is going wrong in your interaction with them, that actually there is something fundamentally wrong with you, so only you can be wrong in this situation. And we both know that both of those things are not true. They can be wrong. Anybody can be wrong. And autism is not to blame for everything, but many people do blame autism for everything. I heard somebody say the other day that this person is like, something's up with them. And they coupled so many things with autism, like narcissism. And again, I know I've done a video on that because there might be some crossovers, but there's crossovers also within the neurotypical community, and a couple of different mental health conditions like your schizophrenia and your bipolar, where people really struggle with them, and then autism. And they was making out like all of that was just one thing. And they was saying it with very negative connotations. And this happens a lot within many different minority communities, like I say all the time, but it also happens a lot within autism too. And number 8 is creating codependency. I don't say that codependency is a negative word. It's not. And many of us are codependent, or we need assistance. We might need support to varying degrees. But when a person is intentionally and deliberately making a person with autism more codependent on them, and saying, and basically giving them no opportunity to be able to have a voice, or to be able to advocate for themselves, or to be able to understand a situation through their own lens, and they use it as leverage for potentially manipulation, or they just use it as leverage to have control over another person, that is gaslighting. It's gaslighting because so many components will be included in creating additional codependency that might not necessarily be required. Please tell me your thoughts. Remember, you are absolutely allowed to have your own opinion on this. I know I didn't touch on the double empathy problem, but I know that that is absolutely included in the first point of sensory sensitivities. But I think that that deserves a platform and a video all of its own. But again, please do let me know your thoughts. And did you say bingo? And have you experienced those things? And is there any more that you would include? I would love to know your thoughts. As always, speak soon.